Hi there! So I recently watched Another Simple Favor, which, if you're not familiar, is the sequel to A Simple Favor from 2019 starring Blake Lively and Anna Kendrick. And I was really excited for this sequel because I have fond memories of the first one. And then I saw all the negative reviews online and I was fully prepared to be like, actually, guys, it's a masterpiece. And you're all just sexist and don't have taste. But yeah, I watched it and it is pretty shit. So it was a very stressful experience for me watching this film because I wanted to like it so much. I wanted to, but I just couldn't. And I want to say, I think that a huge part of the negative reviews that the film is getting is in part because of Blake Lively's reputation at the moment, which I think is unfair to the film, of course. I saw a lot of like reviews, comments on Letterboxd and Rotten Tomatoes that were dragging Blake Lively's performance and saying she was a bad actress, which I found so stupid because someone can be a horrible person and still be a great actress. And although I don't know if Blake Lively is a horrible person or not, I try to stay out of that drama and it doesn't really interest me. But she's definitely a great actress, and you cannot tell me that Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively are not carrying these fucking movies, alright? The movies without them, without their great performances, would be like so bland. And it's the part that I remembered about the first one that I liked, and that's an aspect that they had in the second one as well, but there's a lot of things that went wrong. It's frustrating because the film had a lot of potential. There was a lot of mystery and intrigue set up, and the first half I really enjoyed, but then it went downhill in the second half. So it got me wondering, why was it so bad? How could Another Simple Favor have been improved? Why are sequels seemingly always disappointing? What is a sequel and why does Hollywood love to make them? So let's get into all of these questions. We're going to talk about sequels, about the history and what makes a good sequel, and then in the end we're going to try to improve Another Simple Favor, and I'm going to present you with my own little fanfic basically. So let's get into it. In a sense, no sequel is as good as its predecessor. Sequels inevitably seem to fail us in some obscure yet fundamental way. Sequels in our modern era have a bad rep. We see them as ultimately inferior to the original and also as a cheap money grab for Hollywood. According to Jess-Cooke, it is an essential Hollywood practice to recycle the experience of a successful movie as far as possible through merchandise, theme parks, video games, sequels, spin-offs, remakes, and adaptations. Disney, Marvel, DC come to mind, but there are many other examples. Think Mean Girls. It was a film, then it was a remake, then we got a musical, and then we got a film from the musical. None of which ended up being as good as the original. But what is a sequel? Deriving from the Latin verb sequi, meaning to follow, a sequel performs as a narrative extension designating the text from which it derives as an original rooted in beforeness. Things can actually get really confusing because while Shrek 2 is a sequel, the second Hunger Games film, Catching Fire, is not. It doesn't help that Hollywood is tripping over itself with its sequels, prequels, remakes, sequels of the sequels, or even the sequel A meets sequel B trope like King Kong vs. Godzilla, which even has sequels of its own. So let's try to get some order into this and talk about the difference between a sequel, a prequel, a trilogy, and a serial. Now, the prequel obviously is not a narrative continuation of the original. Instead, it tells the before story, but since it's released after the original, it is easy to confuse with the sequel. Now, as for the trilogy versus sequel part, let's say we have Shrek 2 coming out, that makes it a sequel. With Shrek 3, you'd assume that it becomes a trilogy, and with Shrek 4 a serial, but that's not true. Actually, Shrek 2, Shrek 3, and Shrek 4 are sequels. That's right, good job. Actually, Jess-Cooke coins the term threequel to make a distinction between having 3 sequels and 1 trilogy. The difference is that the trilogy aims to tell one overarching story that is only concluded with the 3rd one. Again, think Hunger Games, where there is a typical storytelling formula within each of these films. Only in the 3rd one do they take down the Capitol, and that story subsequently ends. Sequels are a continuation, but they do not tell one overarching story. And then we have the serial. Not this one, but think more like James Bond or Indiana Jones. The serial is defined by its defiance of change. James Bond never ages, never marries, or changes his vocation. He always stays more or less the same character. And you don't have to watch the films in the right order in order to understand what's going on. The sequel, on the other hand, often shows the characters and their circumstances change in contrast to the original. I think that is also where a trap for disappointment lies. When we end the first film, we are left with a specific ending that lets us imagine how the characters' lives look after the events of the film, often in a happily ever after scenario. The sequel erases and overrides these images with events that maybe we didn't want for these characters. That, by the way, is often why I don't watch the last episode of a TV show, because the ending I imagine in my head is ultimately more satisfying. The sequel is also highly self-conscious, as it engages with the audience's expectations in a much different way to the original. The filmmakers of the sequel know that the first film set certain expectations. In many ways, the sequel not only references but serves as a commentary on the original. In that, Jess-Cooke argues that the sequel appears more interactive to audiences. They are asked to contextualize and reflect on the shots, motifs, inside jokes and callbacks, similarities and dissimilarities, cinema trends and history. Where spectatorial interactivity comes into full effect in the sequel is chiefly at the level of engaging with the text that appears unfixed due to the prevalence of many open endings, reinterpretations, and repetitions. That is a huge reason for the boom in fandom culture that we see today. We engage with media in a much more interactive way than in the previous decades, through internet discussions, fanfics and fan art, fan theories and review forums. As said, the unfixed nature of the sequel opens up the space for that. The film sequel has its origin in the literary tradition and can be found throughout the history of storytelling. As such, it dates back as far as Homer's Iliad from the 18th century BC. Also, surprisingly, William Shakespeare wrote sequels for some of his plays, which makes me wonder, like, obviously he is not a big Hollywood corporation aiming for box office success, but I'm sure he wanted to get some good money as well as be an artist. So I would really like to know whether he was writing these sequels out of an artistic pursuit or an economic one. In the earliest period of cinema history, from the late 1880s to the 1910s, serials were actually very popular and guaranteed box office success. People were used to this as it was previously a literary tradition in Victorian times. Think Sherlock Holmes, for example. Again, serials tell stories with the same characters, plot devices and settings, with characters and circumstances largely unchanging. From the late 1910s on, sequels became more and more popular, promising a divergence from this sameness. The films were advertised as more dramatic, more thrilling, more powerful than the original. Unlike serials, sequels offered film-savvy audiences the ability to apply knowledge of a previous production in a much more evaluative manner. So the sequel kind of offered an advanced viewing experience compared to the serial at that time. And that notion of changes and improvement very much mirrored the zeitgeist of the time period. If you like hearing about early cinema history, check out my video on Alice Guy, the forgotten great pioneer of cinema, who was responsible for the first narrative film. The production of blockbuster sequels reached new heights in popularity in the 70s. In 1975, a New York Times article written by Judy Klemesrud said, "The way things are going, it won't be long before almost every new movie is a sequel to an old movie." This is just one of many articles and critical writings that would in the following decades proclaim sequelitis as a sickness Hollywood had succumbed to. Rather than the image of improvement from the 1910s and 20s, sequels now had the reputation of being unoriginal, exploitative, and generally lesser than the original. Jess-Cooke claims that from the 80s onward, more self-reflective and experimental sequels have been produced, like The Godfather or the Matrix sequels. And everyone can probably think of some sequels that they really enjoyed. But less so sequels that were actually an improvement of the original. So I think the general attitude today is the sequel is a hit or miss situation that more often than not misses. So we as an audiences can be excited for a sequel of a beloved film, but also not terribly shocked when that sequel ultimately disappoints. Let me know if you have a different attitude towards sequels in the comments. Now let's get into another simple favor, and for that we need to get the plot of A Simple Favor and then Another Simple Favor straight. Our main character Stephanie is a widowed mother living in American suburbia. She is the kind of mom who always does everyone at the school cake sales. She doesn't swear, she's very cutesy, she has a video blog channel where she talks about #momlife and gives baking and craft tips. One day her son makes a friend at school and asks to go on a play date. That is how Stephanie meets Emily, the kid's mom. Emily is stylish and avant-garde. She works in fashion as a PR director and spends little time with her child or with keeping up appearances. The polar opposite to Stephanie, she is dominant, blunt, and unconventional. She and Stephanie become very close, so close that Stephanie reveals to her the dark secret hiding behind her cookie-cutter front. When her father died, she met a half-brother she didn't know she had at the funeral and started to hook up with him. After finding out about this, her husband took the half-brother for a ride, killing both of them in a murder-suicide. So, obviously that's a lot, but Emily doesn't judge her and simply jokes about Stephanie being a brother fucker. One day, Emily calls Stephanie to ask her a simple favor to pick up her son from school. Stephanie does so, but then Emily goes missing. Stephanie starts talking about the case online and how she tries to investigate what happened, which attracts a lot more viewers. She starts becoming Emily's replacement in the woman's home, caring for Emily's husband, Sean, and their son. Then Emily's body is found in a lake, and Stephanie grieves her friend. But just after the funeral, she starts sleeping with Sean. Emily is now widower. But then some curious things happen. Emily's son tells Stephanie that he has seen his mother around, and also Stephanie gets a text containing the words brotherfucker. So Stephanie starts investigating into Emily's past. She finds out that Emily was a con artist and also that her real name was Hope McLadden and that she was one of 3 triplets. 3 triplets is kind of a double. That she was one of triplets. One of the triplets was stillborn and the other one, Faith, estranged after Hope and Faith set their parents' house on fire and assumed new identities. I know it's a lot. Stephanie confronts Emily, who shows up at her own grave. The body in the river is, of course, her twin sister Faith, who Emily drowned. What follows is multiple surprising double-crossing twists between Sean, Emily, and Stephanie, with Stephanie finally getting Emily arrested for murder. Okay, so it suddenly got really dark. I hope you can still see me. And also there's a thunderstorm outside. So hopefully that creates some ambiance for you. I know that the plot is a lot and it sounds kind of wild and trashy when I tell it to you like this. But the thing is, it is supposed to be. I think this review captures it really well. And also this one. What makes the film really enjoyable is the multifaceted dynamics between Emily and Stephanie. They have a opposite attracts dynamic, a rival dynamic, a BFF, no one gets me like you dynamic, and I'm going to fucking kill you and put you in jail dynamic. And all of that is infused with a heavy dose of homoerotic tension. So I was really curious to see how their relationship would develop in the sequel. Let's get into the sequel. So the second film starts with Stephanie as a successful true crime creator. At the release event for the book she wrote about Emily, who shows up fresh out the slammer and engaged to an Italian old money guy called Dante. In front of everyone, she asks Stephanie to come to the wedding in Capri and be her bridesmaid. Stephanie, though very aware that Emily might try to kill her, accepts this because content. They fly with a private jet to Capri, and it quickly becomes evident that Italian old money is, of course, a euphemism for the mafia. The mother of Dante hates Emily, and as a way to fuck with her, she has invited Emily's mother and her aunt Linda, whom, as you can imagine, she has quite a complicated relationship with. So the engagement party has a lot of tension. Also there's Sean, who was somehow legally forced to come to the wedding with his son, and he is not handling things very well. The dynamic between Emily and Stephanie jumps back and forth between the usual homoerotic, playful tension, a real sense of fondness, and a feeling of danger. The two are constantly cracking jokes and flirting, and then suddenly threatening to kill each other 2 seconds later. But just before the wedding, Sean is murdered, and Emily's behavior becomes strange and unfamiliar. She marries her mafia prince, but at the party after the ceremony, he gets shot by an unknown killer and dies. Stephanie, who witnessed the murder first and alarmed everyone, is somehow suspected to have killed him, even though there is literally no reason for this. She is placed under house arrest and is visited by the grieving Emily. But there she has the realization that that is not Emily. It's the third triplets, Charity. So it turns out that the triplets' aunt, who had delivered the triplets, had hidden Charity to have her for herself and raised her in a way where it's evident that Charity did not get to have a normal mental development. Now Stephanie tries to escape, and she is found by Dante's mother, gets interrogated, and is then supposed to be killed. The real Emily rescues her and gets clean about what has been going on. She tells Stephanie that she is a beard for Dante, who is in love with a man from the rival mob. And she describes how she had been drugged by her aunt and Charity before the wedding. The two confront Linda and Charity and try to save Emily's son from her. Emily manipulates Charity into pushing Linda off the cliff. Charity takes Emily's place in prison, and Emily goes into hiding, while keeping in touch with Stephanie, who is taking care of both of their sons.
I'll be keeping an eye on you.
I'm always hiding in plain sight, brotherfucker.
You be normal for once, just say goodbye. I'll talk to you later.
Another Simple Favor fulfills the expectations of the sequel in terms of showing change and progression. Most notably, the second film takes place in Italy as opposed to the suburban setting of the first film. Also, we see the character's circumstances change in contrast with the first one. Emily is released from prison and engaged to a new man and suddenly a part of this mafia family. Stephanie starts out with also very different circumstances and also a different mindset in this film. She has embraced her darker, cynical, confident, snarky side and is now basically a true crime content creator with many followers, an agent, and a book release. And instead of her secret in the first film, there is a new haunting memory that plagues her with guilt. The sons of the two women have also aged and have now very different dynamics with their mothers. And Emily's husband in the first film is now her ex-husband, who has become a side character in a more pathetic, resentful, prone to drinking version of Sean. So Another Simple Favor does a good job at putting us into a new setting with familiar characters that have nonetheless gone through some changes enough to intrigue us. That is why I was really thrilled by the first half of the film. It instilled both curiosity and thrill for the new plot and made me happy to see these familiar characters of the first film. Where the sequel takes a turn is in the second half, where all this great setup crumbles as it fails to satisfy the viewer's expectations. The plot starts to not really make sense, for example Stephanie being accused of murdering Dante without having any reason to. It turns from clever to messy, predictable, and feels very slow and anticlimactic. All of this could have been forgiven. After all, A Simple Favor and Another Simple Favor are both films that are meant for entertainment and not to be taken seriously, steering into satire territory. The plot of this kind of film can be messy and still hold up its entertainment factor. For me, the film went from good to bad, though, just through this one scene. Trigger warning here for incest and SA. If you don't want to hear about this, you can mute this and I will hold up my thumb when you can come back to us. So, that scene. In the second half of the film, Emily tells Stephanie how she was drugged by her still alive triplet. In a flashback, we see her lie on a bed, conscious but unable to move, and her sibling cuddles up to her and starts to put her hand somewhere to make them both feel good. We see Emily stare in horror, unable to speak or defend herself. And being told this, Stephanie reacts with a joke. So she's a sister fucker, which she realizes, oh, maybe too soon, adding, that was dark, are you okay? And Emily just brushes it off like, yeah, I'm fine. One question, why? Why would you do this? Going back to the notion of the sequel as an improvement, the writers probably wanted to one-up the shock factor of the first film. The joke of sister fucker is a callback to the brother fucker joke from the first movie, and this shocking thing from the first movie had to be one-upped somehow. But did it? More doesn't always mean better, and in this case it definitely doesn't. Can't you think of anything else that would be equally shocking? Does it have to be this? I don't think so. And did people actually watch the first movie for its shock factor? Let's try to improve the second film by reading the reviews and opinions of the first film. How can we make this film go from disgusting mess to campy masterpiece? So I went through the reviews and comments from people and I wrote down some keywords that were coming up a lot. One word is stylish. People really liked the style, mainly from Emily, the great suits and all, and this kind of jazzy feel to it, like this kind of sense of style and glamour and the martinis and all that stuff. Sexy. You have the word sexy in a lot of commentary and reviews, and I think that's because Blake Lively as a character exudes this kind of glamorous, sexy vibe, and then also you have some sex scenes, but I think if we're being honest, it's the tension between the two main characters. Unpredictable twists. People really like the twist in the ending, although the film, again, it's supposed to be airplane trash, so it's not going to be like David Fincher kind of plot twists. But the back and forth in the first one, I agree, was very satisfying. Another keyword in a lot of reviews is camp / consciously ridiculous. And that's what the first film does really well. And then we also have, as another point, the chemistry of the actresses. So people really liked the two actresses together. And then we have witty writing. So people really enjoyed the jokes that were made in the first film, the dialogue. People seem to enjoy that. So did Another Simple Favor achieve the same things? As far as stylish goes, yes, the filmmakers were very aware that that was something they needed to continue in the sequel. We get a lot of great costume moments, like this hat and this dress and this ridiculous outfit. Though I must say I was missing Emily's suits a bit, but that's just because I'm
bi, actually.
Now for the chemistry and the sexiness of the second film, it does have the same sexy tone, mainly through Emily's and Stephanie's flirting. But after the first film, I needed a bit more to happen with all the tension, But again, that's just because
I'm bi, actually. And so what?
witty writing. There were a lot of good jokes. There was a lot of witty dialogue. But I also noticed that the wit seemed to quietly exit in the second half of the film, which again is a shame. Now, as I said, the second film is also consciously ridiculous. But the difference is it doesn't seem to be in control of that ridiculousness. The comedy in the first film not only lay in the self-awareness, but the ability to control the chaos. In the first film, the ridiculous moments work because they are set against a more grounded background. Here, the scene where Emily gets run over by a car comes out of nowhere. Nowhere else in the film do we see such ridiculous physical comedy. So it's both shocking and fun when it suddenly happens. In the sequel, everything is big and over the top. So when another ridiculous thing happens, we don't get this "oh my god" moment. The scene where Aunt Linda falls off the cliff is just another ridiculous thing that happens, and that is very unsurprising and not really entertaining. Now for the surprising twists towards the end of the film. In the first film, you don't expect a lot, but then a lot happens very quickly towards the end of the film, which makes for a very satisfying ending. The sequel does the opposite. A lot is promised at the start. The film builds up many points of intrigue, like what is going on with the mafia clans, why did Emily invite Stephanie, are they going to kill each other or have sex, why is she marrying this man and how did she get engaged to him out of prison, and who murdered Sean and why, and so on and so forth. And then you gradually get lukewarm answers to these questions served to you step by step in a finale that feels incredibly slow and uninspired. You get very little for what you expected, resulting in an unsatisfactory ending. So how could Another Simple Favor have been fixed? There are a couple of videos on how to write a sequel that I watched for this video. One that I found particularly helpful was this video by writer Brandon McNulty, as he doesn't focus on book sequels and trilogies, but uses movie sequels as illustrations. The first point he names is consistency and originality. So you need to balance familiar aspects of the film, like characters and environments, with things that are new and fresh. You don't want to steer too far in one direction because either you alienate the audiences because everything is too different, or everything is too much the same, so it's kind of a replica of the first movie. Also, you want to build off the strengths of the first film, like we did just now. We tried to, get out the strengths of the first film and try to see if the second one could hold up to the strengths. And then you also want to address some weaknesses maybe of the first film. If there were some inconsistencies in the first film, if there were certain characters that were lacking or needed to be explored more, you can do that in the second film. The next point is to challenge the characters in new and meaningful ways. And then the last point is to raise the stakes. Another thing that I took from these videos is that the sequel needs new character arcs. Something needs to happen to these characters in the film that makes them challenge old beliefs, make mistakes and learn from them, create new motivations and bonds. And here I found the starting point from which we can fix Another Simple Favor. The main flaw in the sequel, I found, is that the film throws these outlandish events at Emily and Stephanie, but develops hardly any internal challenges for them. Both of them are completely unfazed at all the horrible things happening to them or others. Though it fits their characters because they are both quite ruthless, it still feels unsatisfying how static they feel as characters. They are largely the same people by the end of the film. Contrast this to the first film, where Stephanie made a whole development in the first one, and it was really satisfying to watch. The sequel would have been largely improved by giving Stephanie and Emily some more agency and internal struggles that they can resolve through their special bond. So knowing what we know now, let's try to rewrite Another Simple Favor. What we keep from the original Another Simple Favor sequel is the fashion, the sexy banter, and the whole new circumstances for the characters on this island.
So this is my proposal, but keep in mind I'm not a writer. I'm just a silly girl making YouTube videos, so it's not the most refined thing. I just wrote this on a random Tuesday, okay? So please don't take this too seriously. I was just trying to experiment a bit, okay? Here we go.
How about Emily goes missing again, like in the first film, but Charity does not replace Emily, because that is too predictable. Remember again the interactivity between the viewers and the sequel. We know about the twin and possibly the sibling that is apparently stillborn. So if Emily starts acting in any way different or looking a bit different, we as viewers are immediately like, that's another twin thing. That's going to be another twin thing. We are not dumb as viewers, and the whole thing about Charity being Emily was so predictable. Like, you were just like the whole time it was like, yeah, that's a twin, I guess. So again, Emily goes missing. We don't see Charity, and Emily is just gone. Stephanie gets accused of killing her, which would make a whole lot more sense than her being accused of killing Dante. And Stephanie is like, oh my god, this bitch. She's doing it again, you know, like in the first film, planning, scheming, fucking me over, disappearing. So the intrigue of what is Emily planning goes even further in this version of the film. And we get to see Stephanie trying to investigate again. Where's Emily? What is happening to her? This feels familiar to us from the first film, but we don't know what is happening this time. Is Emily in danger this time, or did she plan all of this from the beginning? Turns out Emily was lured by the mafia family to Capri because they are accomplices to Charity, who in this version is an even more stylish, rich and intelligent woman than Emily. This way she feels more different from Faith in the first film, and it also raises the stakes for the main characters if Faith is not this simpleton but a real scary, capable villain. She holds a grudge against Emily for killing their other sibling and plans revenge. Emily somehow frees herself and runs to Stephanie for help, but Stephanie thinks that this is part of Emily's twisted plan and does not believe her. This forces Emily to tell Stephanie how much she means to her, how she would never take revenge on someone who means so much to her, and to open up for the first time and show herself to Stephanie in an emotionally vulnerable way, breaking the cool front. And this would be like the main moment of the film, both of them showing the vulnerable side to each other and developing as characters through that. Emily convinces Stephanie and they team up to take down Charity in a similar way to what Stephanie and Sean did in the first movie. At the end of the film, they have to go into hiding together, driving off into the sunset in a cabrio with new hairstyles and fake names. They have both learned to trust another person and have discovered a softer side to themselves. They leave Sean, who in this version did not come to Italy, to raise the kids by himself in peace. Having them together by the end of the film as con artist partners in crime is a much more satisfying ending because it contrasts the way we started off. So, what did we learn today? Sequels have a bad rep, but in the olden times they were seen as an improvement of the original. If we try really hard, we may get back to that. Sequels offer a different viewing experience that feels more interactive because the viewers can draw parallels, make predictions, and generally reflect on the sequel in contrast to the original. In order for a sequel to be successful, it needs to take all the good parts and fix the mistakes from the original. It needs to be consistent and invoke a feeling of familiarity, but also raise the stakes, put the characters in new circumstances, and present new full character arcs. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you want to see more content on feminism and film, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.